Hello there, and welcome to Deep Sleep Seas. I'm so glad you found your way here tonight. Maybe you've had a long day, or perhaps you're simply someone who prefers drifting off to the gentle mysteries of the ocean rather than counting endless sheep. Either way, you're in the right place. You have nothing to do but rest. Let your shoulders drop, your breathing slow, and your body settle into the comfort around you. Tonight, we're not simply exploring the ocean, we're floating through the kelp forests of southern Australia, among creatures so otherworldly they seem conjured from dreams rather than shaped by evolution. We're here to meet the leafy sea dragon, one of the ocean's most extraordinary inhabitants, a fish that looks more like a fragment of drifting seaweed than a living animal, more art than biology, more phantom than flesh. These remarkable creatures haunt the underwater forests of Australia's temperate coast, their bodies adorned with delicate appendages that flutter and sway with each gentle current. They are ghosts in the kelp, merely invisible masters of disguise, drifting through a world few humans ever witness. But before we begin our journey, if you find these ocean stories soothing, consider subscribing so you never miss the next deep dive. And if you're still awake, let me know in the comments where in the world you're listening from. I read every single one. Now settle in, let the day fall away, and let's drift down into the cool, green-lit waters where the dragons hide. The southern coast of Australia holds secrets, while the Great Barrier Reef draws crowds and cameras. Another reef system stretches along the temperate shores, quieter but no less magnificent. This is the Great Southern Reef, a vast ecosystem of rocky outcrops and swaying kelp that extends for over 8,000 kilometers from the waters off Brisbane all the way around to Western Australia. It covers an area of 71,000 square kilometers of ocean floor, a hidden underwater landscape as ecologically important as any tropical coral reef, yet known to far fewer people. This is where the leafy sea dragon makes its home, not in warm, crystalline waters, but in the cold currents that sweep up from the Southern Ocean, carrying nutrients that feed forests of kelp stretching toward the surface. The water here rarely rises above 20 degrees Celsius. It's a realm of golden brown algae, rocky reefs draped in waving fronds, and shadows that shift with the light filtering down from above. The kelp forests grow dense in some places, their canopies forming a roof overhead, while their holdfasts grip the rocks below. In other areas, sandy patches break the forest into clearings, and it's here, at the edges where kelp meets sand, that the leafy sea dragon often dwells. Imagine descending into this world. The surface light fades to a greenish glow. The water is cool against your skin, carrying with it the mineral scent of deep ocean currents. All around you, kelp sways in rhythmic motion, each frond moving like a slow breath. And somewhere in this living tapestry, almost impossible to distinguish from the plants themselves, a leafy sea dragon drifts. Its body moves with the current, leaf-like projections streaming from its head, body, and tail, creating the perfect illusion. It hovers, nearly motionless, and unless it moves one translucent fin or swivels an independently roving eye, you might never know it was there at all. These are not large creatures. A fully grown leafy sea dragon reaches about 30 to 45 centimeters in length, roughly the size of a small ruler. But what they lack in size, they make up for in sheer visual complexity. Every surface of their body sprouts delicate, leaf-shaped appendages called cirri, each one carefully shaped by evolution to resemble the kelp and seaweed among which they live. These appendages aren't functional for swimming. They don't propel or steer. They exist purely for camouflage, breaking up the outline of the fish's body and creating a silhouette that blends seamlessly into the drifting vegetation around them. The body itself is elongated and covered in bony plates rather than scales, giving the fish a segmented, armored appearance. These plates form rings around the body, protection against the rare predator that might see through the disguise. Along the sides of the body run sharp spines, another defense mechanism. When threatened, a leafy sea dragon can curl slightly to present these spines forward, a small gesture of defiance from an otherwise gentle creature. The head is horse-like in profile, giving rise to their classification in the same family as seahorses. The snout is long and tubular, ending in a small mouth that opens like a tiny trapdoor. The coloration of a leafy sea dragon is a masterpiece of natural artistry. Most individuals display a base color ranging from yellowish brown to deep olive green, often with thin bands or stripes across the body. The leaf-like appendages themselves may show olive tones with subtle orange or purple speckles along their edges, adding to the illusion of aged, weathered kelp. But the dragon's appearance is not fixed. Like a living painting that shifts with mood and environment, the leafy sea dragon can change its coloration to better match its surroundings. This ability depends on several factors, including diet, age, location, and stress level. A dragon dwelling among golden kelp may take on warmer tones, while one in an area of darker seaweed might deepen toward brown or even reddish hues. The texture of their skin adds another layer to their disguise. It's not smooth and scaled like most fish, but covered in small tubercles and irregular surfaces that catch the light unevenly, just as real kelp does. When sunlight filters down through the canopy above, dappling the water with shifting patterns of light and shadow, the leafy sea dragon becomes part of that play of illumination, its body fragmenting visually into patches of brightness and darkness that make it nearly impossible to perceive as a whole animal. Their eyes are perhaps their most remarkable feature. Positioned on either side of the head, they can move independently of one another, allowing the dragon to watch in two directions at once without moving its body. One eye might scan the kelp above for potential threats, while the other watches the sandy bottom for the tiny movements of prey. This gives the leafy sea dragon an almost omniscient quality, as if it sees everything within its domain without ever betraying its presence through movement. And movement, when it comes, is extraordinarily subtle. Unlike most fish that swim with obvious fin beats and body undulations, the leafy sea dragon propels itself using fins so transparent they're nearly invisible. Along the side of the head, just behind where you might expect an ear to be, sit two small pectoral fins. These fins flutter at high frequency, creating gentle thrust. Further back, along the spine near the tail, a single dorsal fin undulates in delicate waves. Together, these fins allow the dragon to move with precision and control, but not with speed. The leafy sea dragon is one of the slowest swimmers in the ocean. Researchers have tracked them moving at speeds of up to 150 meters per hour. To put that in perspective, at top speed, it would take a leafy sea dragon over 6 hours to travel a single kilometer. They are not built for racing through open water or fleeing from fast predators. Instead, they've evolved a different strategy entirely. They don't run, they vanish. They master the art of not being seen in the first place. The kelp forests where they live are dynamic environments, constantly in motion. The kelp itself, despite being rooted to the rocky bottom, sways with every passing current and wave pulse, fronds spiral and twist. Smaller pieces of vegetation drift freely, torn loose by storms or the grazing of herbivores. In this environment of perpetual movement, the leafy sea dragon has learned to mimic not just the appearance of kelp, but its motion. When a current flows through the forest, the dragon doesn't fight it. It drifts with the flow, its appendages streaming behind it or fluttering gently in the turbulence. To anything watching, it appears to be nothing more than another piece of plant matter caught in the current's embrace. This camouflage is so effective that the leafy sea dragon has virtually no natural predators as an adult. Their combination of visual deception, armored body plates and defensive spines makes them difficult targets. Researchers have observed that even when a potential predator passes very close, it often fails to recognize the dragon as prey. The illusion holds. The hunter moves on, and the dragon continues its slow patrol through the forest, undetected and unbothered. But this survival strategy comes with trade-offs. The leafy sea dragon cannot venture into open water where its camouflage would be useless. It cannot pursue fast-moving prey. Its entire existence is bound to the kelp forests, to the specific habitats where its appearance makes sense. And in this specialization lies both their wonder and their vulnerability. The kelp forests themselves are ancient ecosystems, complex three-dimensional structures that rival rainforests in their biodiversity. These underwater woodlands have existed for millions of years, long before the first humans walked the earth, and they support a staggering variety of life. Every layer of the forest, from the rocky substrate at the bottom to the sunlit canopy at the surface, hosts its own community of organisms. Barnacles and sponges encrust the rocks. Sea urchins graze on the kelp holdfasts. Small fish dart among the fronds. Seals hunt in the open spaces between kelp beds. And throughout it all, nearly invisible in their perfect disguise, leafy sea dragons drift. The kelp species that dominate these forests belong primarily to the brown algae, despite their name sometimes appearing golden or olive in color. Eclonia radiata, the golden kelp, forms the backbone of most forests along the southern coast. Each individual plant consists of a holdfast that grips the rock like a root system, though it doesn't actually absorb nutrients from the substrate. A flexible stipe extends upward from the holdfast, equivalent to a tree trunk, and from the stipe, multiple fronds branch out, reaching toward the light. These fronds are the photosynthetic engines of the plant, capturing sunlight and converting it into the sugars and other compounds that fuel growth. The growth rate of kelp is genuinely astonishing. Under ideal conditions with cool water, abundant nutrients and sufficient light, kelp can grow as much as 0.5 meter per day. This rapid growth is driven by a process called upwelling, where deep ocean currents rise toward the surface, bringing with them nutrients from the seafloor. These nutrients, particularly nitrogen and phosphorus, are like fertilizer for the kelp. When upwelling is strong, the forests explode with growth, fronds lengthen, new plants establish, and the entire ecosystem pulses with productivity. But kelp forests are not static. They respond dynamically to seasons, storms, and environmental conditions. In winter, when water temperatures drop and nutrient levels typically rise, kelp grows vigorously. The forests become dense and lush, providing abundant habitat and food. In summer, as waters warm slightly and nutrient levels may decline, growth slows. Some fronds are shed. The forest thins somewhat, taking on a different character. This seasonal rhythm has shaped the life cycles of all the creatures that depend on the kelp, including the leafy sea dragon. The structural complexity of a kelp forest creates what ecologists call habitat heterogeneity. Many different microhabitats in close proximity. Near the surface, the canopy layer forms a roof of fronds that float at or just below the waterline. This canopy creates shade for the layers below while also damping wave action, making the water beneath calmer. Fish that prefer low light or calm conditions congregate here. Predators patrol the canopy edges, knowing that prey will be abundant. Below the canopy lies the midwater column, a twilight zone, where light is filtered green and gold through the kelp above. This is where many fish species spend their time, using the vertical kelp stipes as reference points for navigation and as shelter from currents. The leafy sea dragon favors this zone particularly, drifting among the stipes and fronds where its camouflage is most effective. The swaying motion of the kelp in this layer perfectly matches the dragon's own gentle movements. At the bottom of the forest, the understory consists of smaller algae, including red and green seaweeds that can photosynthesize in the reduced light that filters down through the canopy. Rocks are covered in colorful incrustations. Anemones wave their tentacles, filtering passing water for food particles. Crabs scuttle through the crevices. And in the spaces where the forest floor opens to sandy patches, entirely different communities establish themselves. These sandy clearings between kelp beds are critical habitat for leafy sea dragons. The transition zones where rock meets sand, where kelp gives way to open space, are ecotones, areas where two different habitats intersect and create unique conditions. Many species thrive in ecotones because they can access resources from both adjacent habitats. For the leafy sea dragon, the kelp provides camouflage and shelter, while the sandy areas often harbor rich populations of mysid shrimp and other small crustaceans that are the dragon's primary food. Seagrass meadows, particularly beds of Posidonia, represent another important habitat. These are not algae, but actual flowering plants that have adapted to marine life. Posidonia forms dense underwater meadows with long, ribbon-like leaves that sway in the current much like kelp. For a leafy sea dragon, a seagrass meadow provides camouflage opportunities similar to a kelp forest. The vertical orientation of the grass blades creates the same visual environment of streaming lines and filtered light, where the dragon's appendages blend seamlessly. The water temperature in these southern Australian waters is crucial to understanding why leafy sea dragons occur where they do and nowhere else. The Southern Ocean that surrounds Antarctica sends cold currents northward along the Australian coast. These currents mix with warmer waters from the tropics, creating a temperate zone where temperatures typically range from 12 to 20 degrees Celsius year-round. This cool water is not comfortable for tropical reef fish, but it's ideal for kelp and for species like the leafy sea dragon that have adapted to temperate conditions. Temperature affects everything in the ocean. It influences metabolic rates, determining how fast animals can move and digest food. It affects oxygen levels, with cooler water holding more dissolved oxygen than warm water. It controls the distribution of species, creating invisible boundaries where tropical species give way to temperate ones. For the leafy sea dragon, temperatures above 20 degrees Celsius create stress. Their physiology is tuned to cooler water. When heat waves strike and coastal waters warm, the dragons may retreat to deeper, cooler water if possible, or they may suffer physiological damage if warming is severe and prolonged. Climate change represents perhaps the greatest long-term threat to kelp forest ecosystems and their inhabitants. As the ocean absorbs heat from the atmosphere, the temperate zone is shifting poleward. Waters that were once cool enough for kelp are becoming too warm. This has already led to catastrophic losses in some regions. Tasmania, at the southern tip of Australia, has lost more than 95% of its giant kelp forests since the 1940s. The kelp died as water temperatures exceeded its tolerance, and its place was taken by sea urchins and smaller algae that create far less habitat structure. The loss of kelp forests represents a cascading collapse of entire ecosystems. When the kelp dies, all the species that depend on it are affected. Some can relocate to remaining kelp beds further south. Others, like the leafy sea dragon with its limited range and low mobility, may have nowhere to go. The dragons cannot simply swim to New Zealand or South Africa, where cooler water and kelp forests might still exist. They are bound to Australian waters by millions of years of evolution in this specific place. But kelp forests are resilient ecosystems when conditions allow. They can recover from disturbances if the underlying environmental parameters remain suitable. After storms tear through and rip away kelp, new growth begins within weeks. Holdfasts that remain attached send up new stipes. Spores released from surviving plants settle and germinate. Within a season or two, the forest can rebuild itself. This natural resilience gives hope that with proper management of human impacts and control of climate change, kelp forests and their inhabitants might persist. The Great Southern Reef, where leafy sea dragons live, is increasingly recognized as an ecosystem of global importance, comparable to the Great Barrier Reef in ecological and economic value. The fisheries supported by the reef, particularly rock lobster and abalone, generate hundreds of millions of dollars annually for the Australian economy. The reef supports tourism, particularly dive tourism focused on encountering charismatic species like the leafy sea dragon. It provides coastal protection, buffering shorelines from storm surge, and it sequesters significant amounts of carbon, helping mitigate climate change. Conservation of the Great Southern Reef means protecting not just the kelp, but the entire interconnected web of species and processes that make the reef function. It means controlling pollution from agricultural runoff and urban development. It means managing fisheries sustainably so that populations of lobsters, abalone and fish remain healthy and fulfill their ecological roles. It means establishing marine protected areas where human impacts are minimized. And it means addressing the root causes of climate change to prevent further warming of the ocean. Within this vast reef system, the leafy sea dragon occupies a unique niche. It is both predator and prey, though as an adult it has virtually no predators. It controls populations of mysid shrimp, which in turn graze on algae and detritus. The dragons themselves, when they die, become food for scavengers and nutrients for the ecosystem. They are indicators of ecosystem health, their presence suggesting that water quality is good, habitat structure is intact, and the food web is functioning. The loss of leafy sea dragons from an area would signal broader problems in the kelp forest ecosystem. The daily life of a leafy sea dragon follows rhythms set by light and tide. As dawn breaks over the southern Australian coast, the first rays of sunlight begin penetrating the kelp canopy. In the sheltered spot where a dragon has rested through the night, perhaps nestled among thick fronds or tucked against a rocky outcrop, the increasing light triggers a shift in behavior. The dragon's eyes, which have remained partially alert even during rest, begin scanning more actively. Independent movement of each eye allows continuous surveillance of the surrounding environment without the need to move the body and potentially reveal its position. The dragon doesn't leap into activity. There is no morning rush, no frantic start to the day. Instead, there is a gradual increase in alertness and subtle repositioning. The tiny pectoral fins begin their rapid flutter, so fast the movement is nearly invisible, but creating just enough thrust to lift the dragon slightly off the bottom or pull it free from the kelp where it rested. The dorsal fin begins its gentle undulation, and the dragon begins to drift, not in any particular hurry, but with purpose nonetheless. Territory for a leafy sea dragon is not defended aggressively, the way some fish defend breeding sites or feeding grounds. Rather, it's a familiar area, a home range that the dragon knows intimately. Research using acoustic tracking tags has revealed that individual dragons typically remain within areas of just a few hectares, though they may make occasional excursions beyond these boundaries. Within their home range, they know every rock, every kelp patch, every sandy clearing. They know where mysid shrimp are most abundant at different times of day. They know which routes through the kelp offer the least resistance to their slow swimming. They know where to find shelter when currents strengthen or storms approach. This intimate knowledge of place develops over time. Young dragons, newly independent from their father's tails, must learn their environment. They explore gradually, expanding their range as they grow and gain confidence. Mistakes are costly. A young dragon that strays too far into open water, where camouflage fails, may attract a predator. One that ventures into water too shallow may risk being stranded by a receding tide. But those that survive learn, and by adulthood they move through their territory with an efficiency that speaks to deep familiarity. The dragon's movement through its territory is governed by energy economics. Swimming, even at slow speeds, requires energy. Finding and consuming food provides energy. The balance between energy expenditure and energy intake determines whether an animal can survive and reproduce. For a leafy sea dragon with its slow metabolism and constant need to feed, the strategy is to minimize movement costs while maximizing feeding opportunities. This means drifting with currents when possible, rather than fighting them. It means positioning in areas where prey is abundant so that feeding requires minimal searching. It means moving along established routes that require the least effort to navigate. Studies tracking individual dragons have revealed fascinating patterns. One dragon monitored over 10 days stayed within a remarkably small area, moving in what appeared to be a regular patrol pattern through preferred habitats. Another tracked dragon made a much longer excursion, traveling several hundred meters from its normal range before returning with uncanny accuracy to the same small area where it had been originally tagged. This navigation ability suggests that dragons use landmarks, possibly specific rocks or kelp formations, to orient themselves within their environment. The speed at which a leafy sea dragon moves has been measured at up to 150 meters per hour when moving purposefully. But this is not a sustained speed. Much of the time, the dragon is nearly stationary, holding position in the current or drifting passively with water movement. The slow speed is a function of their propulsion system. The tiny transparent fins can only generate so much thrust, and the rigid body covered in bony plates and drag-creating appendages is not hydrodynamically efficient. Speed was never the goal of their evolution. Invisibility was. There's something almost meditative about watching a leafy sea dragon navigate its territory. The creature exists in a state of perpetual slow motion, each movement deliberate and economical. When it needs to rise slightly in the water column, the pectoral fins increase their flutter rate. When it needs to descend, the fins slow and gravity takes over. Turning is accomplished through differential thrust from the left and right pectoral fins combined with subtle steering from the dorsal fin. The entire process is so gradual, so gentle, that it barely seems like swimming at all. It looks more like controlled drifting, as if the dragon is suspended in some invisible current that only it can feel and manipulate. The dragon's day is structured around feeding opportunities. In the early morning hours, as light increases, mysid shrimp that have been inactive during the night become more active. They emerge from the kelp fronds, where they've sheltered, and begin feeding on the algae and microscopic organisms that coat the kelp surfaces. This is prime hunting time for the dragon. It positions itself near kelp patches where mysids are abundant and waits. Patience is infinite. Time is meaningless when you are perfectly disguised and energy requirements are met through steady opportunistic feeding. When a mysid drifts or swims within range, the dragon's response is instantaneous. The tubular snout rotates toward the prey. The mouth opens explosively, creating powerful suction that pulls in water and prey alike. The entire strike happens in less than a tenth of a second, faster than a human eye can follow. The mysid vanishes into the dragon's mouth and is swallowed whole. Then stillness returns. The dragon resumes its drift, eyes scanning, waiting for the next opportunity. In a productive morning, a dragon might capture dozens of mysides, each capture nearly identical to the last, a repeated action perfected over millions of years of evolution. As the day progresses and the sun climbs higher, light penetration into the kelp forest changes. The patterns of light and shadow shift, areas that were dim in early morning may become brightly lit by midday. The dragon adjusts its position accordingly, moving into deeper shade if brightness increases, or into more open areas if cloud cover dims the light. These movements are subtle and slow, but they demonstrate an awareness of changing conditions and a behavioral flexibility that helps optimize camouflage throughout the day. Midday often brings stronger currents as tidal exchange peaks. Water flows more rapidly through the kelp forest, and the kelp itself sways more vigorously. The dragon doesn't fight these currents. Instead, it uses them, allowing the flow to carry it while making small adjustments with its fins to control direction. Drifting with the current is energetically cheap, and as long as the dragon remains within its known territory, it can afford to travel this way. When the current slackens, the dragon can move back to preferred locations through its own swimming effort. Social interaction among leafy sea dragons is minimal for most of the year. These are solitary creatures that seem to prefer isolation. When two dragons encounter each other outside of breeding season, they typically ignore each other or move slowly apart to maintain distance. There's no aggression, no territorial display, just a quiet avoidance. Space in the kelp forest is abundant enough that multiple dragons can share an area without coming into conflict as long as each maintains its own core territory. But behavior changes when breeding season approaches. As winter transitions to spring in the Australian calendar, from August through December, something shifts in the dragons. Males and females that have spent months in solitude begin seeking each other out. Chemical signals in the water, pheromones released as bodies prepare for reproduction, help males and females locate one another. Visual displays become important too. A male may brighten his colors, showing more intense yellows or oranges. A female's body shape changes as her ovaries swell with developing eggs. When a male and female meet during breeding season, their interaction is gentle and ritualized. There is none of the aggressive competition seen in many species. Instead, there is a slow courtship dance. The pair may swim together, rising from the bottom toward the surface in synchronized spirals. They mirror each other's movements, turning and drifting in harmony. This dance can last for hours, strengthening the pair bond and ensuring that both partners are ready for the critical moment of egg transfer. Throughout all of this, throughout the daily routines and seasonal changes, the leafy sea dragon remains what it has always been, a creature of the kelp forest, inseparable from its environment, moving through its world with a grace that seems almost otherworldly. Every aspect of its behavior has been shaped by the need to survive in a specific habitat, and that shaping has produced an animal so perfectly adapted that it seems less like a product of evolution and more like a work of intentional art. To understand how such an extraordinary creature came to exist, we must look backward through deep time into the evolutionary history that produced not just the leafy sea dragon, but the entire family of fishes to which it belongs. The story begins roughly 50 million years ago, during a period called the Eocene, when the continents were still shifting into their current positions and the oceans were warmer than today. Somewhere in the ancient seas, a lineage of fish began evolving unusual traits that would eventually give rise to the cyngnathids, the family that includes pipefishes, seahorses, and sea dragons. The name Cyngnathidae comes from ancient Greek words meaning fused jaw, referring to the distinctive tubular snout that all family members share. This snout represents a radical departure from the typical fish mouth. Instead of jaws that open wide to engulf prey or bite chunks from food, the cyngnathid mouth is a tube that creates suction. This feeding strategy allowed these fish to specialize on small, elusive prey that larger mouth predators couldn't easily catch. Over millions of years, the cyngnatid lineage diversified into hundreds of species, adapted to different marine environments. Some became long, slender pipefishes that hide among seagrass blades or coral branches. Others evolved into seahorses with prehensile tails that could grip vegetation, allowing them to anchor in currents. And in the waters around Australia, a branch of this family tree gave rise to sea dragons, taking the traits of their ancestors and elaborating them into something unprecedented. The 3 species of sea dragons alive today represent the survivors of what was likely a more diverse radiation, The weedy or common sea dragon, Philopteryx tanniolatus, is the most widespread, found along much of southern and eastern Australia. It has appendages, but they're smaller and less elaborate than those of its cousin. The ruby sea dragon, Philopteryx duici, was only discovered and described in 2015, living in deeper waters off Western Australia. It lacks the leafy appendages entirely, and instead relies on its deep red coloration for camouflage in the dim light of deeper reefs. And then there is Phycodurus equus, the leafy sea dragon, standing alone in its genus, the only species to have evolved the extraordinary elaborate appendages that make it perhaps the most ornate fish in the ocean. Recent advances in genomics have allowed scientists to peer into the DNA of sea dragons and begin unraveling the genetic basis of their remarkable traits. In 2022, researchers published full genome sequences for both leafy and weedy sea dragons, revealing surprising features that help explain how these animals evolved their unusual forms. What they found was remarkable, a genome architecture unlike that of most other fishes, characterized by unusually high levels of repetitive DNA sequences. Repetitive DNA consists of sequences that appear multiple times throughout the genome. Some of these repetitions are transposable elements, also called jumping genes, because they can copy themselves and insert the copies into new locations in the genome. In most organisms, these jumping genes are kept in check by cellular machinery that suppresses their activity. But in sea dragons, certain families of transposable elements have proliferated extensively. Elements called BOVB and TC1 have expanded dramatically in sea dragon genomes, reaching densities much higher than in related fishes. Why does this matter? Transposable elements can influence evolution in profound ways. When they insert near genes, they can alter gene regulation, changing when, where, or how much a gene is expressed. They can create genetic variation that natural selection can act upon, and they can sometimes capture and move regulatory sequences from one part of the genome to another, creating new combinations of genetic control. The researchers studying sea dragon genomes found that transposable elements were especially enriched near genes that had expanded in copy number, suggesting the elements played a role in generating the genetic raw material for evolution to work with. One gene family that caught the researchers' attention was CARB2, involved in cellular processes related to secreting large molecules like collagen. Collagen is critical for building bone and connective tissue. In sea dragons, CARB2 has undergone copy number expansion, meaning there are more copies of this gene than in related species. The researchers hypothesized that this expansion may relate to the elaborate bony exoskeleton and the connective tissue-rich appendages that characterize sea dragons. More gene copies could mean more protein produced, which could support the growth of more extensive skeletal and connective tissue structures. Perhaps even more intriguing, the researchers found that sea dragons have lost certain genes that are important in other vertebrates. Genes from the FGF family, fibroblast growth factors, are critical for development of limbs, fins, and many other structures in vertebrates. Yet sea dragons are missing some FGF genes entirely. How can they develop at all without these seemingly essential genes? The answer may lie in compensation. Other genes may have taken over the functions normally performed by the missing FGF genes, or the developmental processes in sea dragons may have been reorganized in ways that don't require these particular genes. The feeding mechanism of a leafy sea dragon is a perfect example of how evolution shapes organisms to match their ecological niche. Every aspect of the dragon's feeding apparatus reflects millions of years of refinement for capturing tiny, fast-moving prey in a complex three-dimensional environment. The tubular snout that extends from the front of the dragon's head is not merely a simple tube. It's a sophisticated suction device, a biological pipette capable of creating intense negative pressure in a fraction of a second. The process begins with detection. The dragon's independently moving eyes constantly scan the surroundings, searching for the telltale movements of mysid shrimp. These tiny crustaceans, typically just a few millimeters long, are the dragon's primary prey. Mysids feed on algae and detritus among the kelp fronds, moving with a characteristic jerky swimming motion that makes them visible despite their small size. When a dragon spots a mysid within striking range, usually less than 2 centimeters away, the feeding sequence initiates. The dragon's body rotates slightly to align the snout with the target. This rotation is subtle, accomplished through differential fin movements, but it's critical for accuracy. The snout itself can flex slightly, helping with final aiming. Then comes the strike. The dragon's mouth opens explosively, the buccal cavity expanding so rapidly that it creates powerful suction. Water rushes into the mouth, carrying the mysid with it. The entire event happens in about 1/20th of a second, one of the fastest movements in the vertebrate world. The mysid, despite being a capable swimmer, has no chance to react or escape. Once inside the mouth, the mysid is swallowed whole. The dragon has no teeth, nothing to chew with. The prey item passes directly into the digestive tract, a simple tube that runs from mouth to anus. Unlike most vertebrates, the leafy sea dragon has no stomach, no expandable chamber where food can be stored and gradually digested. Instead, digestion happens continuously as food moves through the intestine. Enzymes break down the mysid's proteins and fats, nutrients are absorbed across the intestinal wall, and waste products are expelled. The entire process is efficient, but inflexible. The dragon cannot eat a large meal and then fast for days the way some predators do. It must feed constantly throughout the day to meet its energetic needs. A single leafy sea dragon may consume more than 1,000 mysid shrimp in a day. This seems like an enormous number, but each mysid is tiny and provides only a small amount of nutrition. The dragon is essentially grazing, capturing prey continuously whenever it's available. This feeding strategy is well suited to an animal that moves slowly and cannot chase fast prey over long distances. Instead of pursuit hunting, the dragon practices ambush predation, waiting in camouflage until prey wanders close enough for that explosive strike. The abundance of mysid shrimp in kelp forest ecosystems makes this feeding strategy viable. Mysids are numerous, reproducing quickly and forming dense aggregations where food is plentiful. They occupy a key position in the food web, feeding on microscopic algae and detritus while serving as prey for larger animals like the leafy sea dragon. The dragon in turn helps control mysid populations, preventing them from overgrazing the smaller algae that grow on kelp surfaces. But what happens when mysids are scarce? During periods of low productivity, perhaps in summer when nutrient levels drop, mysid populations may decline. The dragon must work harder to find food, spending more time searching and expending more energy in the process. If food scarcity becomes severe, the dragon may lose body condition, drawing on stored energy reserves. In extreme cases, if starvation is prolonged, the dragon may die. This vulnerability to food availability is one reason why habitat quality is so critical. A degraded kelp forest with reduced productivity cannot support the same density of mysids, and therefore cannot support as many dragons. The reproductive biology of leafy sea dragons showcases one of nature's most fascinating reversals of typical sex roles. In most animal species, females bear the greater burden of reproduction, producing large, nutrient-rich eggs, and often providing parental care. Males typically invest less, producing numerous small sperm and moving on to seek other mates. But in the cyngnethid family, this pattern is flipped. Females produce eggs and transfer them to males, who then carry the developing embryos through gestation and give birth to live young. This extraordinary system begins with courtship. During breeding season, which runs from late winter through spring in the Australian calendar, male leafy sea dragons undergo physiological changes that prepare them for pregnancy. The brood patch on the underside of the tail, a specialized area of skin, becomes highly vascularized, with blood vessels proliferating to supply oxygen to the eggs that will soon be deposited there. The tissue takes on a spongy texture, and small cup-shaped depressions form, each one sized to hold a single egg. Meanwhile, females develop eggs within their ovaries. These eggs are larger than those of many fish species, packed with yolk to nourish the developing embryo. As the eggs mature, the female's body swells noticeably. She becomes ready to mate, and she begins seeking a male partner. The search may involve traveling beyond her normal home range, responding to chemical signals in the water that indicate where males are located. When male and female meet, they engage in a courtship ritual that can last for hours. The pair swim together, their movements synchronized. They may rise toward the surface together, spiraling around each other in a graceful dance. This prolonged courtship serves multiple functions. It allows both partners to assess each other's health and readiness. It synchronizes their reproductive timing, and it strengthens the pair bond, ensuring cooperation during the critical egg transfer. The actual mating occurs when both partners are ready. The female positions herself next to the male, aligning her body with his. She extends her ovipositor, a tube-like organ that emerges from her genital opening. Carefully, precisely, she places eggs onto the male's brood patch, one at a time. Each egg nestles into one of the cup-shaped depressions. As the egg is positioned, the male releases sperm to fertilize it. The fertilized egg adheres to the brood patch through chemical bonding, attaching so firmly that it cannot be dislodged by currents or movement. This process continues until the female has deposited all her eggs, typically between 100 and 250 eggs in total. The male's tail becomes completely covered with bright pink eggs, arranged in neat rows across the brood patch. The weight and bulk of these eggs change the male's appearance and swimming dynamics. He becomes noticeably thicker through the tail region, and his movement may be slightly impaired. But this is the price of fatherhood in the sea dragon world. Over the next 9 weeks, the male carries his precious cargo. The blood vessels in his brood patch supply oxygen to the developing embryos and remove waste products. Nutrients from the egg yolk sustain the embryos, but the male provides the life support system that keeps them alive. He continues his normal activities, feeding, patrolling his territory, but always with the added burden of the developing young. As the weeks pass, the eggs undergo dramatic changes. The bright pink color gradually shifts to purple, then to deep orange. Through the semi-transparent egg membrane, the developing dragon becomes visible. You can see the tiny heart beating, the eyes forming, the body taking shape. By week 8, the embryos are fully formed miniature dragons, ready for life outside the egg. Hatching is a gradual process. The male begins pumping his tail rhythmically, creating pressure changes that help the young break free from their egg membranes. He may rub his tail against rocks or seaweed, providing mechanical stimulation. One by one, over a period of 24 to 48 hours, the baby dragons emerge. They are tiny, just 20 millimeters long, barely larger than a grain of rice, but they are complete, fully formed, and immediately independent. There is no parental care after birth. The moment a baby dragon leaves its father's tail, it is on its own. It must find food, avoid predators, and learn its environment without any help. This seems harsh, but it's an effective strategy. By investing in pregnancy and ensuring the young hatch at an advanced stage of development, the male increases their chances of survival. The young are not helpless larvae. They are miniature versions of adults, capable of swimming, hiding, and feeding from their first moments of independent life. The challenges facing young leafy sea dragons are immense. They hatch without the elaborate appendages that give adults their camouflage. They have small, simple projections, but nothing like the full leafy disguise they'll develop later. This makes them vulnerable. Any predator that can see them can eat them. Fish, larger crustaceans, even sea anemones will consume baby dragons if given the chance. Studies suggest that only about 5% of hatchlings survive to adulthood. 95% are lost to predation, starvation, or other causes in their first weeks and months of life. But the threats facing leafy sea dragons extend far beyond natural predation and competition. Today, human activities pose challenges that the dragon's evolution never prepared them for. Habitat loss and degradation top the list of concerns. The kelp forests that dragons depend on are under pressure from multiple sources. Coastal development brings pollution in the form of agricultural runoff, sewage discharge, and industrial effluents. These pollutants can trigger algal blooms that deplete oxygen in the water, creating dead zones where marine life suffocates. Even at sublethal levels, pollution stresses the dragons, compromising their immune systems and reducing their reproductive success. Climate change represents perhaps the most insidious threat. As the ocean absorbs heat from the warming atmosphere, water temperatures in southern Australia are rising. The dragon's physiology is tuned to cool water, and they struggle when temperatures exceed their comfort range. The kelp they depend on is even more sensitive. Major kelp forest die-offs have already occurred in Tasmania, where more than 95% of giant kelp has been lost since the 1940s. The culprits are warming water and the invasion of long-spined sea urchins that graze the kelp down to bare rock. While leafy sea dragon populations haven't experienced this level of catastrophe yet, the trend is ominous. Storms, though natural, have become more intense with climate change, and their impact on leafy sea dragon populations can be devastating. The dragons have no way to anchor themselves when heavy seas churn through their habitat. They are tumbled by the surge, sometimes washed up on beaches where they die stranded. After major storms, dead and dying dragons are sometimes found on shore, victims of the ocean's violence. While populations have evolved resilience to natural disturbance levels, increasing storm frequency and intensity may overwhelm that resilience. Illegal collection remains a problem, despite full legal protection. The dragon's beauty makes it highly desirable to aquarium hobbyists and collectors. A single specimen can command enormous prices on the black market, creating incentive for poaching. The animals are sometimes taken by divers who don't understand or don't care about conservation laws. Most collected dragons die quickly because their care requirements are so demanding. They need specific water temperatures, pristine water quality, and a constant supply of live mysid shrimp. Few private collectors can provide these conditions, and the animals perish, a senseless waste driven by greed. Yet there is reason for hope. Legal protections are real and enforced. The Australian Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act designates the leafy sea dragon as a protected species. The states where they occur, South Australia, Victoria, and Western Australia, all prohibit collection without permits. Only a single pregnant male per year is allowed to be collected for breeding programs, and even this limited harvest is carefully monitored. The export of wild-caught dragons is essentially banned. These laws, combined with increasing public awareness, have helped stabilize populations after the critical declines of the 1990s. Conservation efforts extend beyond legal protection. The Dragon Search Project engages citizen scientists in monitoring dragon populations. When divers encounter a dragon, they can report the sighting, providing location, photographs, and observations. Over time, this database has grown to include thousands of records, helping researchers understand population distributions, identify important habitats, and track changes over time. It's a powerful example of how public engagement can contribute to science and conservation. Research programs have made significant progress in understanding dragon biology and developing techniques for captive breeding. Several institutions worldwide now successfully breed leafy sea dragons in captivity, including the Minnesota Zoo, which maintains one of the few breeding populations outside Australia. The knowledge gained from these programs, particularly regarding water quality requirements, feeding protocols, and reproductive triggers, feeds back into wild population management. The leafy sea dragon has become a cultural icon, particularly in South Australia, where it serves as the official marine emblem of the state. This cultural recognition raises public awareness and creates political will for conservation. The biennial Leafy Sea Dragon Festival attracts thousands of participants, many traveling specifically to learn about and potentially see wild dragons. This ecotourism, when managed responsibly, creates economic value for protecting dragons and their habitat. This brown alga can grow remarkably quickly under favorable conditions, adding height at rates approaching 1 meter per day during peak growing seasons. Its fronds reach upward toward the light, and in deeper waters, they may stretch 20 meters or more from holdfast to tip, creating true underwater forests with a canopy layer, a mid-water column, and a forest floor. Where conditions permit, another species joins the forest. Giant kelp, Macrocystis pyrifera, forms even more impressive structures, its gas-filled bladders, allowing fronds to reach the surface even in water 50 meters deep. These kelp forests are not uniform. They vary with depth, wave exposure, and the underlying geology. In shallow waters where waves pound against the coast, kelp may be shorter and more robust, built to withstand the constant surge. In deeper, calmer waters, it grows taller and more delicate, Rocky reefs provide the hard substrate kelp needs to attach, but between these reefs lie patches of sand and seagrass meadows. The leafy sea dragon uses all of these habitats, though it shows preference for the transitional zones. It likes to hover over sandy patches near kelp-covered rocks, where it can drift down to the bottom or rise up into the fronds as needed. It's found in seagrass meadows as well, particularly beds of Posidonia, where its camouflage works just as effectively among the waving grass blades. The depth range where leafy sea dragons are typically found extends from as shallow as 3 meters down to 50 meters or more. Different populations seem to favor different depths. In South Australia, many dragons are found in relatively shallow water, making them accessible to divers and snorkelers who know where to look. In Western Australia, populations tend to occur deeper, often below 20 meters. This depth variation may relate to water temperature, which the dragons are quite sensitive to. They thrive in waters between about 12 and 20 degrees Celsius. In summer, they may move deeper to find cooler water. In winter, they might come closer to the surface as temperatures even out. The geographic range of the leafy sea dragon is surprisingly restricted for a marine animal. They are found only along a specific stretch of southern Australian coast, from Wilson's Promontory in eastern Victoria, westward all the way to Jurien Bay in Western Australia, about 220 kilometers north of Perth. This is an arc of coastline spanning approximately 8,000 kilometers, yet it represents the entirety of their natural range. They exist nowhere else on Earth. No other ocean, no other hemisphere, no distant population on another continent. They are endemic to this one region of temperate Australian waters, and this makes them irreplaceable. If something were to happen to this habitat, there would be no rescue population elsewhere. The leafy sea dragon would simply cease to exist. Within this range, they're not evenly distributed. Certain areas hold higher concentrations. The waters around South Australia, particularly near Adelaide, are famous among divers for reliable leafy sea dragon sightings. Locations like Rapid Bay, Edithburgh, Second Valley, and Victor Harbour have become pilgrimage sites for underwater photographers, hoping to capture images of these elusive creatures. The rocky jetties and protected bays provide ideal habitat, and local dive operators have even established codes of conduct to protect the dragons from excessive disturbance. In Western Australia, popular spots include Nari Capes Marine Park and Shoalwater Islands Marine Park, though dragons here are typically found deeper and require more advanced diving skills to observe. The dragons don't migrate long distances like some marine species. Individual leafy sea dragons were once thought to have very small home ranges, perhaps staying within just a few hundred meters of a particular spot for their entire lives. But more recent research using tracking technologies has revealed they're more mobile than previously believed. Tagged individuals have been recorded moving several hundred meters from their usual haunts before returning with remarkable accuracy. They possess a strong sense of direction that allows them to navigate back to preferred locations even after being displaced by currents or storms. Their world is small by ocean standards, but within it they know every rock, every kelp patch, every sandy clearing. These creatures are part of an ancient lineage, members of the family Cygnatheidae, which includes seahorses, pipefish, and the other species of sea dragons. The family name comes from Greek words meaning together and jaw, referring to the fused jawbones that create their distinctive tubular snouts. It's a family renowned for peculiar anatomies and behaviors, but even among these oddities, the leafy sea dragon stands out. It is the sole member of its genus, Phycodurus, a name derived from Greek words meaning seaweed and skin. The species name, eques, comes from Latin for horse, acknowledging the seahorse-like profile despite the vast differences in appearance. The evolutionary history of sea dragons is written in their genes. Recent genomic studies have revealed remarkable features in their DNA, including unusually high amounts of repetitive sequences and transposable elements called jumping genes. These mobile genetic elements appear to have proliferated in the sea dragon lineage, possibly contributing to the rapid evolution of their extraordinary traits. The leaf-like appendages, the extreme curvature of the spine, the elongated facial bones. All of these features arose relatively quickly in evolutionary terms, shaped by the intense selective pressure of camouflage in their kelp forest environment. The Cygnathiid family likely originated around 50 million years ago, branching off from other bony fishes during a period of significant ocean changes. Over time, the lineage diversified into hundreds of species of pipefishes, dozens of seahorse species, and just 3 known species of sea dragons. The 3 sea dragon species reveal different solutions to similar problems. The weedy sea dragon, Philopteryx taeniolatus, has appendages but fewer and shorter than the leafy. The recently discovered ruby sea dragon, Philopteryx dewey, lacks the leafy appendages entirely, and instead relies on its deep red coloration for camouflage in deeper, darker waters. Only Phycodurus eques, the leafy sea dragon, has taken the strategy of elaborate leaf-like disguise to such an extreme. Genetic studies comparing leafy and weedy sea dragons have found key differences in genes related to skeletal development and skin appendage formation. In particular, genes from the fibroblast growth factor family, which play crucial roles in limb and fin development in vertebrates, show unusual patterns in sea dragons. Some genes that are essential for fin and limb formation in other animals are missing entirely from sea dragon genomes, while others have been duplicated or modified. The appendages themselves, despite looking like fins, lack fin rays and are mostly composed of connective tissue and bone matrix. They are evolutionary innovations, structures that arose not from modifying existing fins but from elaborating defensive spines and skin structures into something entirely new. The bony plates that cover a leafy sea dragon's body are another distinctive feature of the cygnathid family. Where most fish have flexible bodies covered in scales, cygnathids have rigid exoskeletons made of interlocking bony rings. This armor provides protection but greatly limits flexibility. A leafy sea dragon cannot bend its body in the sinuous curves that most fish use for swimming. Its spine shows extreme curvature in places, particularly a pronounced bend in the middle of the body. But this curvature is fixed. The dragon is locked into its shape, unable to coil or flex. This rigidity is why they rely on tiny transparent fins for locomotion rather than body undulation. One of the most unusual features shared by all cygnathids is the lack of pelvic fins, the paired fins that most fish use for stability and maneuvering. In the leafy sea dragon, these fins are completely absent. This leaves them with only the pectoral fins on the head and the dorsal fin on the back for propulsion and steering. The tail, which in seahorses can coil and grasp objects, is straight and inflexible in the leafy sea dragon. It cannot grip kelp or rocks to anchor itself. This is part of why storms can be so devastating to leafy sea dragon populations. When heavy seas whip through their habitat, the dragons have no way to hold on. They're at the mercy of the current, and many get swept away, sometimes washing up on beaches where they perish unable to return to the water. But perhaps the most extraordinary feature of the cygnathid family, the trait that truly sets them apart in the animal kingdom, is male pregnancy. In all species of seahorses, pipefish and sea dragons, it is the male that becomes pregnant and gives birth. This reversal of typical vertebrate reproductive roles has fascinated scientists for generations, and in the leafy sea dragon, the process takes on its own unique character. The journey to understanding how a male fish can become pregnant begins with the recognition that pregnancy is fundamentally about providing a safe, nurturing environment for developing offspring. In most animals, females take on this role because they produce the larger, nutrient-rich eggs. Males produce small, mobile sperm. But in cygnathids, while females still produce the eggs, they transfer them to the male's body, where he fertilizes them and then carries them through development. In the leafy sea dragon, this process begins with courtship. Though these fish spend most of their lives in solitude, when breeding season arrives, they seek each other out. The timing varies across their range, but generally peaks during the Australian winter and spring, from late August through December. Males and females find one another through chemical signals in the water and visual displays. The courtship itself is an elegant dance. The pair will rise together from the bottom, spiraling around each other in the water column. They mirror each other's movements, males and females swimming in synchrony. Their colors may brighten during these interactions, the males in particular showing enhanced coloration as they compete for females. When a pair has bonded, the female's belly swells with eggs. She can produce up to 250 eggs in a single clutch, each one bright pink and about 2 millimeters in diameter. The transfer of these eggs to the male is a precise operation. The female possesses a specialized organ called an ovipositor, a long tube that extends from her body. During mating, she uses this to carefully place eggs onto a specialized area on the underside of the male's tail. This area is called the brood patch, and it's unlike anything found in seahorses. Seahorse males have a fully enclosed pouch on their belly, where eggs develop in a sealed environment. The leafy sea dragon male has no such pouch. Instead, his brood patch is an area of spongy, highly vascularized skin with small cup-like depressions. Each depression can hold a single egg. The female deposits her eggs one at a time into these cups, and it's during this transfer that fertilization occurs. As each egg is placed, the male releases sperm to fertilize it. The eggs then attach to the brood patch, where they will remain for the next several weeks. The eggs adhere firmly to the brood patch through chemical bonding, and the male's body begins providing for them. The spongy tissue beneath each egg is rich with blood vessels that supply oxygen to the developing embryo. Over the course of about 9 weeks, the eggs undergo dramatic changes. Initially bright pink, they gradually darken, turning purple and then a deep orange as development progresses. Through the semi-transparent egg membrane, you can sometimes see the tiny embryo growing inside, its heart beating, its form taking shape. The male carries this burden with patience. He continues his normal routine, feeding, drifting through the kelp forest, but now weighted down with the next generation attached to his tail. The developing eggs increase his visibility slightly, the bright colors standing out more than his camouflaged body, but the trade-off is accepted. Some researchers have observed males rubbing their egg-laden tails against rocks and seaweed, possibly to help aerate the eggs or remove parasites. As the weeks pass and the embryos mature, the eggs begin to hatch. This is not a sudden event, but a gradual process that can take anywhere from 24 to 48 hours. The male assists by pumping his tail in rhythmic contractions, creating pressure changes that help the young break free from their egg membranes. One by one, tiny miniature sea dragons emerge. They're about 20 millimeters long at birth, smaller than a human thumbnail, and they are immediately independent. The moment they leave their father's tail, they are on their own. There is no parental care after birth, no protection or feeding assistance. The newborn dragons must fend for themselves from their first breath. And what a vulnerable beginning it is. The tiny juveniles lack the elaborate leafy appendages of adults. They have small, simple projections, but nothing like the full camouflage they'll develop as they grow. This makes them easy targets. Larger fish, crustaceans, and even sea anemones prey on the young dragons. Studies suggest that only about 5% of hatchlings survive to adulthood. 95% are consumed in their first weeks or months of life. It's a brutal culling, but it's how the species persists. Those few that survive carry genes for the best camouflage, the quickest learning, the most effective hiding. They are the ones that will reproduce and continue the line. The young dragons that do survive grow quickly in their first year. They begin life feeding on microscopic zooplankton, the tiny drifting animals that fill the ocean. Each hatchling carries a small yolk sac attached to its belly that provides nutrition for the first few days. But they instinctively begin hunting immediately. Their tubular snouts work from birth, creating suction to draw in prey. As they grow larger, they graduate to bigger prey, eventually focusing on the food that will sustain them for the rest of their lives. Tiny shrimp called mysids. Mysid shrimp, sometimes called opossum shrimp, because females carry their young in a brood pouch, are crustaceans that typically measure just a few millimeters in length. They live among kelp fronds and seagrass blades, feeding on algae and detritus. For the leafy sea dragon, mysids represent the perfect prey. They're abundant in kelp forest ecosystems. They're the right size to be sucked into the dragon's small mouth, and they're highly nutritious, rich in proteins and essential fatty acids. The feeding mechanism of the leafy sea dragon is a marvel of specialized evolution. Unlike fish with teeth that chew their food, the dragon has no teeth and no stomach in the conventional sense. Its digestive system is a simple straight tube from mouth to anus. Food cannot be stored. It must be constantly processed and replaced. This means a leafy sea dragon spends much of its waking hours feeding. In the wild, a single individual may consume 1,000 or more mysids in a day. The act of feeding happens in milliseconds. The dragon drifts through the kelp, moving slowly, its eyes constantly scanning. When a mysid comes into range, usually within a few centimeters, the dragon's response is explosive. Its snout moves toward the prey and its mouth opens, creating a powerful suction. The rapid expansion of the mouth cavity generates negative pressure that pulls water and prey into the snout in a fraction of a second. It's one of the fastest movements in the vertebrate world, over in the blink of an eye. The mysid, having no time to react, is drawn in and swallowed whole. Then the dragon returns to its slow drift, watching for the next opportunity. This feeding strategy is called suction feeding, and it's highly effective for capturing small, fast prey that would be impossible to catch by chasing. The dragon doesn't pursue. It ambushes. It waits with infinite patience, disguised as seaweed, until prey wanders too close. Then strike, swallow, and back to stillness, over and over throughout the day. It's an energy-efficient approach for an animal that moves slowly and cannot afford to waste energy on long pursuits. The dragon's lack of a true stomach means digestion happens constantly as food moves through the intestinal tract. Nutrients are absorbed along the way, and waste is expelled, but there's no capacity for storing a large meal to be digested later. This is why they must feed so frequently. They cannot gorge and then rest for days like some predators. They are perpetually hungry, perpetually hunting. Though their hunting is conducted at such a leisurely pace, it barely looks like hunting at all. As juveniles grow into adults, their appendages become more elaborate. The simple skin tabs of a newborn dragon gradually lengthen and branch, taking on the complex frond-like structure that defines the species. The development of these appendages is influenced by genetics but also by environment. Dragons living among one type of kelp may develop appendages slightly different from those living among another species. The body color darkens and matures, taking on the yellows, browns, and greens of the adult palate. By the time a leafy sea dragon reaches 2 years of age, it is typically fully grown and sexually mature, ready to participate in its first breeding season. The lifespan of a leafy sea dragon in the wild is not precisely known, but estimates based on captive individuals and growth studies suggest they may live anywhere from 5 to 10 years. In captivity, where they are protected from predators and storms, and where food is regularly provided, some individuals have lived beyond 10 years. But wild dragons face constant challenges. Even with perfect camouflage, they are vulnerable. The ocean is unpredictable, conditions change, and for an animal so specialized, so perfectly adapted to one specific environment, any change can be catastrophic. Storms are a natural threat that the leafy sea dragon has faced throughout its evolutionary history. The southern Australian coast experiences powerful weather systems that churn the ocean and tear through kelp forests. During severe storms, the surge of water can rip kelp from the rocks and scatter it across the seafloor. Dragons caught in these upheavals have no means of anchoring themselves. They are tumbled and swept by the current. Some manage to find shelter in deeper, calmer water. Others are thrown about until they wash up on beaches. After major storms, it's not uncommon for dead or dying leafy sea dragons to be found stranded on shore, victims of the ocean's violence. But storms are natural, and populations have evolved resilience to these periodic disturbances. The real threats facing leafy sea dragons today are newer, human-caused, and more insidious. The most immediate is habitat loss and degradation. The kelp forests they depend on are under pressure from multiple sources. Coastal development brings pollution in the form of fertilizer runoff, sewage discharge, and industrial waste. These pollutants can trigger algal blooms that deplete oxygen in the water, creating dead zones where marine life cannot survive. Even sublethal levels of pollution can stress the dragons, affecting their immune systems, their reproductive success, and their ability to maintain the physiological processes that keep them alive. The kelp forests themselves are changing. In some areas, warming ocean temperatures have caused dramatic die-offs. Tasmania has lost more than 95% of its giant kelp forests since the 1940s, a collapse driven by warming water and the invasion of long-spined sea urchins that graze the kelp down to bare rock. While the leafy sea dragon's main range has not yet experienced this level of devastation, the trend is concerning. As the ocean continues to warm, the temperate zone where kelp thrives is shifting poleward, and the dragons may find their habitat literally disappearing beneath them. Climate change affects more than just temperature. It alters current patterns, nutrient upwelling, and storm frequency and intensity. All of these factors shape the kelp forest ecosystem. Changes in any one of them can cascade through the food web. If mysid shrimp populations decline because their food sources are affected, the dragons will struggle to find enough to eat. If kelp species composition changes, the specific camouflage that has evolved over millennia may become less effective. Another serious threat comes from illegal collection. Despite being fully protected by Australian law, leafy sea dragons are still occasionally poached for the aquarium trade and for private collections. Their beauty makes them highly desirable, and a single individual can fetch enormous sums on the black market. The problem peaked in the 1990s when collection became so rampant that it critically shrank populations. Experienced divers in South Australia reported that sites which once held dozens of dragons dwindled to just a handful. In response, the Australian government implemented complete protection for all cygnathid species, making it illegal to collect, harm, or trade leafy sea dragons without specific permits. The law has helped, but illegal collection hasn't stopped entirely. The challenge is that most poaching happens underwater, out of sight of authorities. Divers with no respect for conservation can capture dragons and smuggle them out of the country. The survival rate of illegally collected dragons is extremely low. These animals have very specific needs. cool water temperatures, constant food supply of live mysids, and pristine water quality. Most captors cannot provide these conditions, and the dragons die within days or weeks. It's a waste of life driven by greed and ignorance. Even well-meaning divers can pose a threat through disturbance. Leafy sea dragons are popular subjects for underwater photography, and certain dive sites known for reliable sightings attract crowds of photographers. While observing the dragons doesn't directly harm them, excessive disturbance can stress them, interfere with feeding, and disrupt courtship and breeding behaviors. In response, some dive sites have established codes of conduct. Divers are asked to keep distance, limit their time with individual dragons, avoid using bright lights or flash photography excessively, and never touch or handle the animals. These guidelines help minimize impact while still allowing people to appreciate these remarkable creatures. Beyond direct threats to the dragons themselves, there are broader ecosystem threats. The Great Southern Reef is subject to overfishing of certain species, which can disrupt the food web. Destructive fishing practices like dredging and trawling can damage the seafloor habitat and accidentally capture dragons as bycatch. The spread of invasive species, including sea urchins in some areas, can alter the composition of communities. All of these factors create a complex web of pressures that the leafy sea dragon must navigate. Yet there is hope, and it comes in multiple forms. First, the legal protections are real and enforced. The Australian Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act lists the leafy sea dragon as a protected species. The 3 states where they primarily occur, South Australia, Victoria, and Western Australia, all have specific regulations prohibiting collection and requiring that any development projects consider impacts on sea dragon populations. This legal framework provides a foundation for conservation. Second, monitoring and research efforts have expanded significantly. The Dragon Search Project, managed by marine and coastal community networks in Australia, records public sightings of both leafy and weedy sea dragons. When divers, snorkelers, or beachcombers encounter a dragon, they can report it through the Dragon Search website, providing location, photographs, and observations. Over time, this citizen science initiative has built a database of thousands of sightings, helping researchers track population distributions, identify important habitats, and monitor changes over time. It's a powerful example of public engagement in conservation science. Research institutions and aquariums have also made significant progress in understanding sea dragon biology and developing techniques for captive breeding. While keeping leafy sea dragons in captivity is challenging, several institutions have successfully bred them, including the Minnesota Zoo, which maintains one of the few breeding populations outside Australia. The knowledge gained from these programs, including insights into water quality requirements, feeding protocols, and reproductive triggers, feeds back into conservation planning for wild populations. The leafy sea dragon has become a cultural icon, particularly in South Australia, where it was designated the official marine emblem of the state. This cultural significance raises public awareness and creates political will for conservation. The biennial Leafy Sea Dragon Festival, held in the Fleurieu Peninsula south of Adelaide, celebrates both the creature itself and the broader marine environment it represents. Thousands of people attend, many traveling specifically to learn about and potentially see leafy sea dragons in the wild. This kind of ecotourism, when managed responsibly, creates economic incentives for protecting the dragons and their habitat. Education is another critical component. The more people understand about leafy sea dragons, their ecological role, their vulnerabilities, and their needs, the more likely they are to support conservation measures. Schools throughout Australia use the leafy sea dragon as a teaching tool for lessons about marine biology, adaptation, and conservation. An animated short film called The Amazing Adventures of Gavin, a Leafy Sea Dragon, was created specifically for educational purposes and distributed to primary schools across South Australia. These efforts help build a generation that values and wants to protect these animals. As we drift deeper into our exploration of the Leafy Sea Dragon, it's worth pausing to consider what makes them so compelling to us. Part of it is certainly their beauty. They are objectively stunning animals, their forms so intricate and delicate that they seem impossibly fragile. But there's something more. Perhaps it's their otherworldliness, the way they challenge our expectations of what a fish should look like and how it should behave. Or maybe it's their rarity and vulnerability, the knowledge that they exist in only one small corner of the ocean and could so easily be lost. There's also a deeper resonance in their life strategy. The leafy sea dragon doesn't dominate its environment through size or strength. It doesn't outswim or outfight competitors and predators. Instead, it succeeds through invisibility, through becoming so perfectly attuned to its surroundings that it disappears into them. In a world that often celebrates aggression and competition, the dragon offers a different model, one of subtlety, patience, and harmony with environment. It reminds us that there are many ways to thrive, and that sometimes the quietest approach is the most sustainable. When you watch a leafy sea dragon drifting through a kelp forest, time seems to slow. The usual frenetic pace of ocean life, the darting fish, the constant motion fades away. What remains is stillness animated, meditation in motion. The dragon hovers, barely moving, its tiny fins creating the gentlest thrust. Water flows past, kelp sways, light shifts as clouds pass overhead, and through it all the dragon maintains its position, watching, waiting, existing in a state that seems almost dreamlike. Their daily rhythms follow the sun. As dawn breaks over the Australian coast and light begins penetrating the kelp canopy, the dragons become more active. They've rested through the night, holding position in sheltered spots among dense vegetation or tucked against rocks. Now, with light returning, they begin their slow patrol. Eyes swivel independently, scanning for the small movements that indicate prey. A mysid shrimp emerges from the kelp, moving with its characteristic jerky swim. The dragon tracks it, drifts closer with almost imperceptible movements, and when the distance is right, strikes. The tiny explosion of suction, the shrimp vanishes, and the dragon glides on. This pattern repeats through the daylight hours. Feed, drift, watch, feed again. There is no urgency, no rush. The dragon is not driven by panic or ambition. It simply does what it has always done, what its ancestors did, what its descendants will do if we give them the chance. It exists within the eternal present of animal consciousness, aware without anxiety, alive without angst. As the day wears on and afternoon light slants through the water at steeper angles, the dragon's activity may increase slightly. The hours around dawn and dusk are often peak feeding times when mysids are most abundant in the water column. The dragon takes advantage, feeding more frequently, building energy reserves. But even at its most active, the leafy sea dragon never seems hurried. There is always time. The ocean moves at its own pace, and the dragon moves with it. When darkness comes and light fades from the kelp forest, the dragon settles into rest mode. It doesn't sleep in the way mammals do, with extended periods of complete unconsciousness. Fish sleep is different, a state of reduced activity and awareness while remaining somewhat alert to danger. The dragon finds a sheltered spot, often nestled among dense kelp fronds or in a crevice between rocks where current is minimal, and it can hold position without effort. Its fins continue to make minor adjustments, keeping it stable, but its overall activity drops to near zero. In this state, it will remain until morning light returns and the cycle begins again. The territories that individual dragons establish and patrol are not large by human standards. Research using acoustic tracking devices has shown that many individuals stay within areas of just a few hectares, occasionally making longer excursions but usually returning to core areas. Within these territories, they develop intimate knowledge of the terrain. They know which rocks offer the best shelter in strong currents. They know where mysids are most abundant at different times of day. They know the paths of minimum effort through the kelp, the routes that allow them to patrol while expending the least energy. This site fidelity makes them somewhat predictable to those who know where to look. Experienced dive guides in South Australia can often return to the same locations day after day and find the same individual dragons. The fish become almost like local landmarks, reliable presences in the underwater landscape. Some particularly photogenic individuals become famous in the diving community, recognized by the specific pattern of their markings and appendages. But site fidelity also makes them vulnerable. If conditions in their territory deteriorate, they don't necessarily move to better habitat. They may try to persist in degrading conditions, struggling to find food or maintain health in polluted or disrupted environments. This is part of why habitat protection is so critical. You cannot save the dragons without saving the places they live. The genetic diversity of leafy sea dragon populations is relatively low compared to many marine species. Studies analyzing DNA from dragons across their range have found some population structure, with fish from South Australia showing slight genetic differences from those in Western Australia, but overall diversity is limited. This suggests that populations are somewhat isolated from each other, with limited mixing. It also indicates that the species may have gone through population bottlenecks in the past, periods when numbers dropped very low, reducing genetic variation. Low genetic diversity can be a concern for conservation because it reduces the population's ability to adapt to changing conditions. If the environment shifts and new traits would be beneficial, a genetically diverse population is more likely to have individuals carrying those traits. A genetically uniform population has less raw material for natural selection to work with. For the leafy sea dragon, maintaining what genetic diversity remains is important for long-term survival. The recent scientific advances in understanding sea dragon genomes have opened new avenues for conservation. By identifying specific genes associated with important traits, researchers can potentially monitor populations for signs of inbreeding or loss of diversity. They can also use genetic markers to track individuals and understand how populations are connected by ocean currents. If larvae from one area are drifting to another and successfully recruiting, that gene flow helps maintain diversity. If populations are isolated, conservation strategies may need to ensure connectivity is maintained or restored. Reflecting on the leafy sea dragon's place in the ocean brings us to questions about value and meaning. What is the worth of a single species? Why should we care if this particular fish persists or disappears? These are profound questions without easy answers. From a purely utilitarian perspective, the leafy sea dragon has limited direct value to humans. We don't eat them. They don't provide any products or services we depend on. Their disappearance would not crash any ecosystem we rely on for food or oxygen. But value comes in many forms. There is intrinsic value, the idea that living things have worth simply by virtue of being alive, regardless of their utility to humans. There is aesthetic value, the beauty and wonder these creatures inspire. There is scientific value, the insights we gain from studying their unique adaptations. There is cultural value, the role they play in human stories and identities. And there is ecological value, the part they play in the complex web of relationships that makes up the kelp forest ecosystem. The kelp forest itself is valuable in concrete ways. It's a nursery ground for commercially important fish species. It produces oxygen through photosynthesis. It buffers coastlines from storm surge and erosion. It sequesters carbon from the atmosphere, acting as a brake on climate change. The leafy sea dragon, as one component of that ecosystem, contributes to these functions through its role as predator controlling mysid populations and as prey for the rare predators that manage to catch one. But perhaps the deepest value lies in what the dragon represents. In a world increasingly homogenized by human activity, where ecosystems are simplified and species are lost, the leafy sea dragon is a reminder of complexity, specificity, and the endless creativity of evolution. It's a manifestation of the universe's ability to generate wonder. It exists at the intersection of biology, art, and mystery. And in choosing to protect it, we choose to preserve not just one species but the principle that the living world deserves to flourish in all its weird, beautiful diversity. There are lessons in the dragon's way of life too. Lessons about adaptation and resilience, about finding your niche and mastering it completely. Lessons about patience and stillness in a world that prizes speed and noise. Lessons about blending in versus standing out, about the power of subtlety over aggression. These may seem like small lessons, personal rather than global, but they matter. The way we think about nature shapes how we treat it, and the leafy sea dragon invites us to think differently. Consider the male carrying eggs on his tail, spending weeks devoted to the next generation's survival. There's something humble and nurturing in that image, a reminder that strength takes many forms. Or consider the dragon waiting motionless for prey, exercising patience that most of us can barely imagine. In our hurried lives, that kind of stillness is rare and precious. Or think about the dragon's camouflage, its ability to become part of its environment so completely that it disappears. There's wisdom there about belonging, about being so attuned to where you are that you and place become one. The leafy sea dragon has become a cultural icon, particularly in South Australia, where it was designated the official marine emblem of the state. This cultural significance raises public awareness and creates political will for conservation. The biennial Leafy Sea Dragon Festival, held in the Flergo Peninsula south of Adelaide, celebrates both the creature itself and the broader marine environment it represents. Thousands of people attend, many traveling specifically to learn about and potentially see leafy sea dragons in the wild. This kind of ecotourism, when managed responsibly, creates economic incentives for protecting the dragons and their habitat. Education forms another critical pillar of conservation. Schools throughout Australia incorporate the leafy sea dragon into lessons about marine biology, evolution, ecology, and environmental stewardship. The animated short film The Amazing Adventures of Gavin, a leafy sea dragon, was produced specifically for educational purposes and distributed to all primary schools in South Australia. These efforts help cultivate appreciation for marine life in young people who will become tomorrow's voters, policymakers, and conservation leaders. Within the broader kelp forest ecosystem, the leafy sea dragon occupies a unique ecological niche. As a specialist predator of mysid shrimp, it exerts top-down control on these small crustacean populations. Mysids themselves feed on algae and detritus, so by controlling mysid numbers, the dragon indirectly influences algal communities growing on kelp surfaces. This is an example of a trophic cascade, where predators at one level shape community structure at levels below them through their feeding activity. The dragon's role as an indicator species may be its most valuable contribution to conservation efforts. Because leafy sea dragons require specific environmental conditions, including cool, clean water, intact kelp habitat, and abundant prey, their presence signals that an ecosystem is healthy and functioning properly. Conversely, their absence from historically occupied areas serves as an early warning that something has gone wrong. Perhaps water quality has declined. Perhaps kelp coverage has been reduced. Perhaps the food web has been disrupted. By monitoring dragon populations, scientists can detect ecosystem problems before they become catastrophic. The kelp forests where dragons live provide enormous value to human society beyond their ecological importance. These underwater forests are among the most productive ecosystems on Earth, generating massive amounts of organic matter through photosynthesis. This productivity supports extensive food webs that include species we harvest commercially. The southern rock lobster and black-lip abalone fisheries, both centered in kelp forest habitats, together generate several $100 million annually for the Australian economy. These fisheries depend on healthy kelp forests, and protecting dragon habitat means protecting the foundation of these economically vital industries. Kelp forests also provide critical ecosystem services beyond food production. They act as blue carbon sinks, absorbing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere during photosynthesis and sequestering that carbon in plant tissue and ocean sediments. This helps mitigate climate change. The physical structure of kelp beds dampens wave energy, protecting coastlines from erosion and storm damage. The complex three-dimensional habitat they create supports biodiversity, serving as nursery grounds for juvenile fish and shelter for countless invertebrates. When we conserve kelp forests for the sake of leafy sea dragons, we conserve all these benefits. There is something profoundly moving about watching a leafy sea dragon in its natural habitat. The experience of seeing one of these creatures drifting through the kelp, nearly invisible in its camouflage, strikes observers with a sense of wonder that transcends simple appreciation of beauty. It's the recognition that nature can produce forms so extraordinary they challenge our imagination. It's the humility of realizing that this creature evolved without human input, shaped by forces much older and more patient than civilization. It's the connection to something wild and independent, living its life according to ancient rhythms we can observe but never fully understand. In our increasingly digital, urban world, such encounters with wild nature become more rare and more valuable. They remind us that we share this planet with millions of other species, each with its own story, its own strategies for survival, its own place in the web of life. The leafy sea dragon invites us to step outside our human-centered perspective and appreciate life on its own terms, not for what it can give us, but simply because it exists and has every bit as much right to this planet as we do. Consider what the existence of leafy sea dragons tells us about evolution and time. These creatures are the product of millions of years of gradual change, each generation slightly different from the last, the cumulative effect producing something utterly transformed from the ancestral stock. The elaborate appendages, the specialized feeding mechanism, the male pregnancy, none of these traits appeared suddenly. They emerged slowly through countless generations of variation and selection. Every leafy sea dragon alive today carries in its genes the accumulated wisdom of all those generations, the solutions to challenges that worked, the adaptations that allowed survival and reproduction. This deep history is humbling. It reminds us that life operates on timescales vastly longer than human experience. Civilizations rise and fall in thousands of years. Species evolve over millions. The processes that created the leafy sea dragon were operating long before our species existed and will continue long after we're gone, assuming we don't destroy the conditions that allow them to operate. We are newcomers to this planet, primates who only recently developed technology and science. The dragons are elder inhabitants, their lineage extending back into eras we can only know through fossils and genetic analysis. Yet now, in this brief moment of overlap, the dragon's future depends on us. Through our activities, we have become the dominant force shaping Earth's ecosystems. We have the power to destroy habitats, drive species to extinction, alter the climate itself. But we also have the capacity for wisdom, for choosing to restrain our impact, to preserve rather than destroy, to share the planet with other forms of life. The choices we make about emissions, about pollution, about land use and ocean protection, these will determine whether leafy sea dragons persist or disappear. The responsibility is both heavy and hopeful. Heavy because the stakes are so high, and our track record includes so many species already lost. Hopeful because we have shown we can choose differently. When populations of leafy sea dragons crashed in the 1990s due to collection pressure, Australia responded with strong legal protections that allowed populations to stabilize. When we recognize problems and act decisively, we can make a difference. The dragons are still here. With continued commitment to their protection, they can remain. As night falls over the kelp forests of southern Australia, as the last light fades from the surface and darkness settles over the reef, the dragons find their resting places. They nestle among thick kelp fronds or tuck themselves against rocky outcrops where currents are gentle. Their fins slow their rapid flutter, maintaining just enough thrust to hold position. Their eyes continue to move, scanning the darkness for any threat, but their overall activity drops to minimal levels. They enter a state of quiet rest that will carry them through the dark hours until dawn. In this resting state, the dragons are perhaps most vulnerable. Their camouflage relies on visual deception, matching the appearance of kelp. In darkness, this advantage is negated, but they compensate through behavior, choosing sheltered positions where predators are unlikely to pass, remaining still to avoid attracting attention through movement. Through millions of years of evolution, they have learned where and how to rest safely. The ocean at night is full of subtle sounds that travel well through water. The clicking and popping of shrimp, the distant calls of whales, the low rumble of waves breaking on distant shores. The dragon rests through this submarine soundscape, waiting for the light that will begin another day. When dawn comes and illumination returns to the kelp forest, when green-gold light once again filters down through the canopy, the dragons will stir. They will emerge from their resting places and resume their patrol. Another day of hunting, of drifting, of being perfectly themselves in the only environment they know. This pattern has repeated every day for millions of years. It will repeat tomorrow if the ocean remains hospitable, if the kelp persists, if we choose to ensure their habitat endures. The dragon doesn't contemplate the future. It exists entirely in the present, responding to immediate conditions with behaviors honed by evolution. But we can contemplate the future. We can imagine a world where kelp forests have disappeared, where the water has become too warm, where leafy sea dragons exist only in photographs and memories. And we can choose to prevent that future, to ensure that these remarkable creatures continue their ancient patterns for generations to come. The story of the leafy sea dragon is ultimately a story about specialization and the double-edged nature of adaptation. Every feature that makes them so perfectly suited to life in the kelp forest, the elaborate camouflage, the slow swimming, the specialized diet, also makes them vulnerable to change. They cannot simply move to a different habitat if their kelp forests disappear. They cannot switch to eating different prey if mysid shrimp become scarce. They are locked into their niche by millions of years of evolutionary refinement. This is the paradox of specialization that many species face. Generalists, species that can eat many foods and live in varied habitats, tend to be more resilient to environmental change. They can adapt behaviorally, shifting their diet or moving to new areas when conditions change. But specialists, by definition, have narrower requirements. They excel in specific conditions, but struggle when those conditions shift. The The leafy sea dragon is a specialist par excellence, exquisitely adapted to one environment and practically helpless outside it. Yet specialization has its advantages. By focusing on one niche, by perfecting adaptations for one way of life, specialists can become extraordinarily efficient. They face less competition because few other species can match their specialized skills in their chosen environment. A generalist fish might eat mysid shrimp, but also many other prey types, meaning it must be moderately good at catching various foods. The leafy sea dragon, eating almost exclusively mysids, has become supremely good at catching that one prey type. Its entire morphology and behavior are optimized for success in the kelp forest. Within that forest, it has few equals. The question facing leafy sea dragons now is whether their specialization will doom them or whether we can maintain the habitat stability they require. If we can keep the kelp forests healthy, keep the water cool and clean, maintain populations of mysid shrimp, then the dragon's specialization becomes their strength. They will continue to thrive in their niche. But if we allow rapid environmental change to continue unchecked, their specialization becomes a vulnerability. They cannot adapt quickly enough. They have nowhere else to go. This puts the responsibility squarely on human shoulders. The dragons cannot save themselves. They have no capacity to understand the threats they face or to alter their behavior in response to long-term trends. They can only continue doing what they have always done, hoping the environment remains suitable. We, with our intelligence and technology, with our ability to predict future trends and alter our behavior accordingly, we are the ones who must act. If the dragons are to have a future, it will be because we chose to give them one. And that choice reflects back on who we are as a species. Are we capable of caring about creatures that don't directly serve our interests? Can we value beauty and complexity for their own sake? Will we act as responsible stewards of the planetary systems we have come to dominate? Or will we allow short-term thinking and convenience to destroy what took eons to create? The fate of the leafy sea dragon and of countless other specialized species around the world depends on how we answer these questions. There is something achingly beautiful in the dragon's innocence, in its complete lack of awareness of the larger forces threatening its existence. It drifts through the kelp, hunting mysids, seeking mates, carrying eggs, doing exactly what its ancestors have done for millions of years. It doesn't know about climate change or ocean acidification or pollution. It doesn't know that its range is limited, its population small, its future uncertain. It simply lives, moment by moment, being exactly what it is. There is purity in that, a kind of grace that we, burdened with knowledge and foresight, can only envy. We know too much to have that innocence. We understand the threats. We see the trends. We recognize that time is running out for many species and ecosystems. This knowledge is both curse and opportunity. A curse because it weighs on us, creating responsibility and anxiety, but also an opportunity, because knowledge enables action. We can use what we understand to make better choices, to implement protections, to reverse damage before it becomes irreversible. As we near the end of our journey through the kelp forests, it's time to begin drifting back toward the surface, back toward sleep, back toward the quiet spaces where consciousness softens and dreams begin. The leafy sea dragon will remain behind, continuing its endless patrol through the green-lit forests of southern Australia. It doesn't need our attention to exist. It was there long before humans came to these coasts, and with care, it will be there long after we're gone. But having met them, having spent this time drifting through their world, perhaps something has shifted. Perhaps you'll remember them when you hear about ocean conservation, when decisions are made about marine protected areas or pollution controls. Perhaps you'll think of them and their fragile beauty and know that there are things worth protecting, creatures worth preserving, not because they serve us, but because they are irreplaceable pieces of the living tapestry that makes this planet extraordinary. The ocean holds so many stories. The leafy sea dragon is just one of them, a single thread in the great weaving of life that stretches through the seas. But it's a thread worth following, worth protecting, worth marveling at as we drift through our brief time on this blue planet. As you settle deeper into rest now, imagine yourself one last time in that kelp forest. The water is cool and clear. Sunlight filters down in shimmering rays. All around you, golden kelp sways in gentle rhythm, and somewhere in that swaying mass, nearly invisible, a leafy sea dragon hovers. You might see it, or you might drift past without ever knowing it was there. But it's there nonetheless, a ghost in the kelp, a living work of art, a small miracle quietly existing in its ancient way. Your breathing slows, matching the gentle pulse of the ocean, in and out, like waves on a shore, in and out, like kelp swaying with the current. The dragon drifts, you drift, everything drifts together in the peaceful present moment. There is nowhere to go, nothing to do, just this, just being, just the soft darkness of sleep, beginning to gather around you. The leafy sea dragon doesn't know it's beautiful. It doesn't know it's rare or threatened or protected. It simply is, and in that being, in that unself-conscious existence, there is a kind of perfection. An animal so completely itself, so fully adapted to its world that nothing about it seems accidental or out of place. Every appendage, every color, every behavior has purpose and history. Millions of years of evolution have sculpted it into precisely what it needs to be. And now, as your eyes grow heavy and thoughts begin to blur, you carry with you the image of that dragon, suspended in blue-green water, surrounded by swaying kelp, absolutely still, yet somehow full of quiet life. Let that image sink down with you as you sink into sleep. Let it be a gentle anchor, a peaceful point of focus as consciousness fades. The kelp forests will still be there in the morning, and so will the dragons. They will continue their slow patrol, their patient hunting, their careful survival. They will mate and carry eggs and release young into the current. They will hide from storms and bask in sunlight filtering through the canopy. They will be exactly what they have always been. Ghosts in the kelp, masters of camouflage, living embodiments of the ocean's endless capacity for wonder. Rest now, let go. Float down into sleep as the dragon floats through its forest. There is nothing left to hold on to, nothing left to worry about. Just the gentle darkness, the soft embrace of sleep, and somewhere far away, in cool Australian waters, a leafy sea dragon drifting through the kelp, utterly at home, utterly alive, utterly at peace. Sleep well, dream softly. And when you wake, remember that the ocean holds miracles, that beauty exists in the most unexpected forms, and that there are still places in this world where dragons are real. Good night.